What's up, YouTube? This is Dead Guy Cardboard. I decided to do a video about I guess you could say, the top 10 reasons that I collect T206. I've been collecting them for a number of years now, and I think, this is sort of an interesting list for anyone that's thinking about starting to collect the T206 series. And, it's definitely a big set and a fun set to collect from. And I don't know, not a lot of people know about it, even though it is one of the major sets in the hobby. But I thought this video could help some people. Um, Top 10 reason number one, in no particular order, is they're old. I mean, they're over 105 years old, which is crazy to think about. All these generations that kept these cards intact. Um, just the story behind kids begging for cards, really the beginning of baseball card collecting. Kids hoarding these things. It's pretty impressive that they survived for that long. Number two, history. There's just a ton of interesting history associated with the set. Players that really changed and influenced the game of baseball forever. A lot of these guys implemented, new forms of equipment and really changed the way certain positions are played. And just for example, this guy in front of me, Miller Huggins, he became the manager for the Yankees during the time when they were this powerhouse of Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. Um, Also, in terms of history, it's just loaded with Hall of Famers. I mean, there's 76 of them in this set. There's some big names from Ty Cobb to Cy Young to Chrissy Mathewson to Napoleon Lajoie to Walter Johnson. Here's a few of the bigger names. Just I pulled out. I got Miller Huggins, Chief Bender, Hal Chase. He wasn't in the Hall of Fame, but he was a really good player. You got Mordecai Brown. And the list goes on and on and on, but here are just a few of them I have with me. Napoleon Lajoie. We got Frank Chance, the big-time manager for the Chicago Cubs when they were really, really good. I guess they're good now. Players like Eddie Collins, who just dominated the league for 20 years. Even like some of the minor stars like Doc Crandall. Even the minor star players, just the portraits look really cool, like with the sweater. But that's number two, the history. Number three is they're surprisingly affordable. For being 105, over 105 years old, they're really, really surprisingly affordable. I mean, you can get a VG Common for 30 to 50 bucks. I mean, here's an example of something you could probably find for 50 bucks, maybe a little bit more. But it's just a nice card. Um, and for decent Hall of Famers, not some of the bigger name ones, you can get a pretty good one for $110 to $130. When you're looking for the mid tier Hall of Famers, you're kind of in the range of 200 to 300, a little bit more, and of course it goes up from there if you're talking about Ty Cobb and Walter Johnson and some of the bigger names. But overall, this is a pretty surprisingly affordable set if you want to collect in sort of the collector grade, which is generally considered, VG to VGX, and most of the cards I have around that range. But you can get some really nice eye appeal cards for fairly affordable, I think. Number four, the value. I think these cards really maintain their value. If anything, they increase in value. Albeit very slowly, but and they're also just pretty easy to sell. Especially the minor stars and the Hall of Famers will sell pretty quickly if you decide you're bored with the set, or you want to move on to a different subset within this T206 set. It's pretty easy to sell on eBay and on different websites. And number five, this set will always be popular. I mean, people will always come to this card due to the most valuable card in the hobby, the T206 Honus Wagner, and so it's kind of impossible to avoid some interest in the set when you're collecting baseball cards. I mean, that's how I got into it. I learned about the Honus Wagner, and it sort of led me on this path. And the T206 set will always be considered the big set in the hobby in terms of the big three. And the big three I think are the 1933 Gaudi, and that's because of the all the Babe Ruths, the 52 Tops because of the mantle, and it was Top's first time in the league, and I guess that those are the three, including the T206. Here, just put some new cards up here. So here's just some example of just some fielding cards, which the fielding cards are just as fun to look at as the portraits. So number 6, I think variety. There's just so many ways to collect this set. I mean, for example, you can collect the fielding poses or the portrait poses. You can collect by team, which I've done with the Cincinnati Reds, and I think that's in a video, one of my earlier videos. You can collect by Hall of Famers, by backs. I mean, there's just there's so many different backs, really cool, interesting backs. There's 16 different cigarette brands, and within those brands, there's different varieties. So you could even just collect the backs if you wanted to, and I'm starting to do that. And I think there's a total of 38 backs if you don't include the Ty Cobb back. So you can collect the backs, you can collect the Hall of Famers, you can collect some of the minor stars. You can even collect some of the players, like the Black Sox players. This is another rare back. So there's just a wide variety of way to collect this set. You don't necessarily have to collect all of them, which some people do, because there's 520 cards in this set. If you don't include the big four, like the Honus Wagner and the Joe Doyle heir and the Sherry McGee heir, and Eddie Plank. But 520, that's a lot of cards, and it could get pretty expensive if you go for it, but you certainly can. But if you don't, there's a lot of fun different ways to collect this. Number 7, there's just a ton of resources on this set. I mean, I think more than really any other set in the hobby. There's books and websites dedicated solely to T206 collecting. For example, T206resource.com is a great website. T206.org. There's also net54baseball.com. They have tons of different threads about T206 cards, and through these resources, there's really some interesting things that pop up about the set. Almost on a monthly basis, even though it's been over 105 years. And through those, through the new research and resources, you can kind of collect in fun, new, different ways. Number 8, it is a gateway. Definitely a gateway to true vintage card collecting. I mean, this is a pretty good starter set if you want to get into vintage cards collecting, like pre-war cards. If you want to eventually get into caramel card collecting or other tobacco cards or early bubble gum, this is really a pretty great affordable set to get started as you familiarize yourself with the players from the dead ball era. Number 9, there's definitely a modern card collecting connection. The big thing is to collect rainbows from Bowman and Topps with the blue refractors, gold refractors, etc. And you could easily do that with the T206 because there's multiple backs to get of the same player, which is just like a rainbow. I'll do a video when I complete this collection, but here's this example of a quote-unquote rainbow set I'm doing with with Johnny Kling. And number 10, display. And in my opinion, they display really well. I don't really like the modern cards, the shiny cards, in terms of displaying them. I don't know, I'd be a little embarrassed to showcase that, but I think the old T206s are really a great talking point for people. That they're basically antiques, over 100 years old, and really interesting to look at, and they're a piece of Americana. This is just an example of my portraits displayed. The fielding poses look great too if you put them up in a display case. And then up here, one of the rooms, I have some of the rare old backs. Finally, I just want to provide a couple tips that I've learned about the last couple years collecting T206s. I guess the biggest tip would be to collect cards that have great eye appeal. These cards are really old, and the manufacturing wasn't great, so it is really hard actually to find a card with great eye appeal. And to me, great eye appeal for T206s is a card that's well centered. It's pretty tough actually to find a card that's well centered. I mean, here's an example of a card I bought early on that's off centered from top to bottom, and then later on I started collecting. Started buying cards that are really well centered. So this is an example of a better centered card. Also, I would look out for registration, really sharp registration, and really good color. And that's example of a card with better color than this example. And registration is tough. These are old cards, and the printing wasn't great. What I mean by registration, I mean like the image is in focus and it's not shifted. And then finally, I would look out for cards that are crease free. I'll just put up a couple more examples of cards that have great eye appeal. But yeah, look for cards that don't have creases. I think in the long run, you'll be happy to have examples that don't have creases in them. And so I would definitely ask eBay sellers if the card has a crease in it, because a lot of times you can't spot it in a photo or scan that they provide, and it's often not listed in their descriptions. And I would also ask them if the card has a wrinkle. To me, a wrinkle is really a crease that hasn't fully formed. It's kind of like a spider vein across the card. So definitely ask the seller about creases and wrinkles. Another tip I have is to look beyond eBay when you're buying T206s. I mean, you can get some good deals on cards, and you can find some T206s that just aren't available too often on eBay on some online auction houses. Some of the ones I like to use are Sterling Sports Auctions, Love of the Game Auctions, Joe's Vintage Sports Cards are great, and you can use some of the bigger houses like REA and Heritage. Some of these auction houses you have to pay a buyer's premium, so you have to spend a little bit more money. They usually charge you a percentage based off the amount that you bought, so you might have to pay $20 or something extra. But you can find some tough cards on there. Another thing I would definitely recommend is to do a little research before you start collecting, or when you begin to start collecting, because if you know your cards, you can find some really great deals on T206s that most buyers don't know about. So here's sort of an example of that. These are two American Beauty cards. They look very similar. The one on the left has a border. The one on the right doesn't, even though they're both 350 subjects. But the one on the right is a lot tougher to find. It's just rare. It's actually worth more. But they often go for the same price, even though this one is definitely worth more. So it definitely helps to do your research. And like I said before, T206resource.com is a great place to learn about that. Also, I would just be willing to stretch your budget a bit sometimes. Unlike modern cards, a lot of these T206s don't come up in terms of the rare backs or just in the eye appeal that you're looking for. You might think that, this card might pop up again in the kind of centering and the registration that I like, but you might have to wait a year or two. So definitely occasionally stretch your budget and buy the type of card that you like. Finally, it's not a race. I mean, theoretically, you could buy 500, all 520 of the cards on eBay, but to me, that's not very fun and it's not very economical. So take your time, buy the kind of cards you like. You don't have to be really nice cards. I mean, here's an example of some poor cards, poor to fair cards you can pick up for 15 to 20 bucks, and you can buy a bunch of these if you want. I would definitely recommend being patient, because this is really a fun set to collect. And yeah, that's kind of the final tip, is just to have fun. It's just a hobby. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer them. I'm pretty knowledgeable about the set. So thanks for watching.